last time, the prevalence rates of spouses being battered. The estimates are that 33% of men and 25% of women have been involved in physically aggressive altercations. As I told you last time, I was an abused spouse when I was married to my first wife. It turns out that male to female aggression and female to male aggression is about the same. The difference is that males tend to be bigger than females. That's not true in all cases, of course. My first wife was 5'1" and weighed close to 100 pounds, and I was bigger. I was bigger, and people say, "Well, why don't you just defend yourself?" And the reason is because I certainly didn't want to hurt her. About 30% of all women murdered in the United States each year are murdered by their male partners. This could be boyfriends, and we read these stories all the time in the newspaper. They're what everybody wants to talk about on the news. Strangely and sadly enough, somebody was murdered by their boyfriend, somebody was murdered by their estranged husband. That happens a lot. He's jealous, so he goes ahead and kills his significant other. I told you the story of my own cousin, who was a police officer in Indianapolis, went to a domestic disturbance call. She claimed that he was about to kill her. That's why he responded. That's why he responded without backup, because he heard her screaming in the apartment, went up to the apartment, and of course he was shot and killed, shot in the chest with a 12-gauge shotgun. It was a long barrel shotgun too, so it was a big one. It was a pretty big weapon. But she was standing right behind him, and he actually stepped, he was in front of her when the guy shot him. Anyway, this kind of stuff happens. Let's go to here. Batterers are more likely than non-batterers to be unemployed, to be less well-educated, to be members of a minority group, to be of lower socioeconomic status, to have suffered physical abuse as children, or saw abusive relationships between their parents, and of course it just keeps repeating itself. Adolescents who later became batterers have experienced a higher rate of conduct problems and are more likely to have engaged in early substance abuse. Okay, so is alcohol a good excuse for beating somebody up?
No.
Had a student, real attractive young lady, found herself the perfect boyfriend, and she had been dating this guy for about 6 weeks. They were living together. She came to school with a black eye, and I asked her what happened, and she said, "Oh, those crazy friends of my boyfriend took him out drinking, and they fed him whiskey, and he gets mean when he's drinking whiskey. And he came home and he punched me. And he told me he would never drink again. He would never drink whiskey again. Beer, sure, that's fine, but whiskey makes him mean. So he promised me he'd never drink whiskey again." So guess what happened 2 weeks later? He drank whiskey again. Guess who gave it to him? She did. She gave him the whiskey this time. The third time he got whiskey, he got it from his friends again. "Hey Joe, how you doing?"
Hey, Bruce.
So drinking can be a problem. I had a friend in college who every time he drank gin, he got real violent to the extent that he would start destroying things. That's an umbrella, not a gun, right? Okay.
It's an umbrella.
Okay, thanks. It looked like a camouflage. She had a camouflage covering. I know. People bring you weapons to class, and it looks like it's got a silencer on the top. Okay. Just. Okay. The adolescents tend to have early experiences with coercive or aggressive behavior that may set the stage for similar strategies in adult relationships. So a lot of these individuals are fighters. They're fighters all their lives. And now you can't argue with them. If you do argue with them, that's the way they solve their problems, is by exactly punching people. Batters usually have poor self-concepts. They are they're not very good at problem solvers. A lot of times they solve problems by hitting it, by slamming things. If that doesn't fix it, then they don't know how to fix it. But usually, if you're in that kind of a situation and you're around somebody like this, what do? Well, you know they're going to get angry and they're going to hit something if they get frustrated, so you fix it yourself. So what happens is that this individual evolves as they grow older. They've got all these people around them that are trying to keep them from getting angry, and so they're solving their problems for them, and they never learn to solve their own problems. They're kind of like spoiled. Well, I guess that really is spoiled, isn't it? Because they're using their anger to control everybody around them. Nobody wants them going off on anything. They tend to have limited verbal skills. They grunt like Neanderthal men. They are prone to extreme jealousy, thus they monitor their partner's activities closely and exert excessive control over their partner's whereabouts. They overreact to signs of rejection and alternate between rage and desperation. Does this sound like any mental illness that we talk about from time to time? Borderline personality disorder. They're afraid of rejection. They're codependent to some extent. They use their anger to control their significant other. This is just like borderline personality disorder, and it's going to get worse. Waltz et al. In 2000 revealed 3 distinct types of batterers. There are the individuals that are generally just violent people, and they have learned throughout their lives that they can control the situation with their violence. But there are also individuals that are psychopathological. They are just mean people, and these people do exist. They're always mean, and this is how they control their lives, is by being mean to people. And there are individuals that will only abuse their family. These groups were distinguished by the degree of violence within the relationship and the degree of general violence reported, as well as by personality characteristics. Now, this individual that is he only abuses his own family, this individual usually will not get into fights with other men. But he may batter his spouse. He may batter his children because he can't batter anybody else. Now, a lot of times, this individual, if somebody else is in the area and they call him down on it, that individual will not fight, and he may stop if somebody warns him that if you ever do this again, if I ever hear that you do this again, I'm going to come and beat you up. A lot of times he'll stop because he's cowardly in that way. However, these other 2 individuals, this guy wants to fight. This guy does it to control everybody around him. The individual that's psychopathological. The cycle of violence, attention-building phase, characterized by increased criticism of the partner, perhaps even minor physical assaults. So there's a buildup as the tension is building up. An acute battering incident. The woman has become too dependent on the man to break off the relationship easily, so she allows him to abuse her. And then there's the contrite phase. Now remember, I told you about my friend, or my student, and every time he hit her, and every time he popped her good and busted her lip or blacked her eye, every time that happened, he always came back and begged her to forgive him. It would never happen again. It was the whiskey that did it. And it was never going to happen again until the next time. Until the next time he got whiskey from somebody. So there is the contrite phase. The batterer apologizes for his attack. He promises never to do it again. And he persuades the woman that he is a changed man. My wife used to work at a women's shelter. And one of the problems that they had there was that no matter how many times this guy had beaten up his spouse, he would come to the door, and of course, she was madly in love with him, so she'd go home with him. Saddest situation you can possibly imagine. A lot of times he popped her in the mouth and he knocked her teeth out. One time she had 15 women in the shelter, and she said there were 3 good teeth among all 15 of those women, because the guy their spouses had knocked their teeth out. Did that make any difference? No, they still went home with them. In the old days, we used to say that it took a woman 6 times going to the shelter before she would leave her husband. It's gone up to 8. So learned helplessness is very common in the United States now. Walker identified the cycle of violence in about 2/3 of the 400 women that she studied. This was, of course, in 1979. That was a long time ago. That was almost 50 years ago. Really? No, that can't be. 40 years ago. Yeah, 40 years ago. I can do math. It just takes a while. Is it 40? Yeah, okay, thanks. 40 years ago. As many as 40% of batterers have features of borderline personality disorder, a severe disturbance that is characterized by unstable moods and behaviors. The unstable mood is that this individual, as long as you're nice to them, they reject you. Okay, so this individual has borderline personality disorder. If I show them affection, they will reject me. As soon as I decide it's all over with, this person doesn't really love me anymore, I'm bugging out. As soon as you show them rejection, then all of a sudden they become very clingy. It's a push me, pull me situation. So as long as you're showing them if you try to show them affection, that's the last thing that you get. That's when they reject you. But as soon as you reject them, then all of a sudden they have to have you. It's the most bizarre thing in the whole wide world. Now, some individuals like people with borderline personality disorder, because all they have to do is be mean to them, and they get whatever they want. As bizarre as that seems. But so there are guys out there that like that type of situation, because they don't have to be nice to them. And if they reject them and act mean, then they get a lot of affection from this select individual. So all they have to do is be mean to the individual, and they're good to go. As strange as that may seem. A deep uneasiness, even hostility exists towards some victims of battering. When battered women kill their batterers, they may receive a greater punishment than men who commit acts with similar outcomes. Difficult to assess because the circumstances may be quite different. So if a man kills his wife because she was unfaithful to him, what happens next? Well, potentially he's going to use that as his defense, and potentially it's going to get him a shorter term. But if a woman kills her husband because her husband was mean to her, then or battering her, then she usually gets the book thrown at her. Really? This doesn't make any sense. Shouldn't she get the same understanding that men do? But that's not the way the law works. Who runs the who's on the Supreme Court? Well, who's on the Supreme Court now? Men. Well, there's 3 women. There are 3 women on the Supreme Court, aren't there? Sotomayor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then Keegan. Keegan is the other lady. There's 3 women on the Supreme Court. But there's 6 guys. And almost all the judges out there are male. Yeah, so wait a minute, this is going to get bad, because somebody was just nominated to the Supreme Court like Saturday. Okay, it was Brett Kavanaugh. Battered women's syndrome, we're going to talk more about Brett Kavanaugh in just a second. Battered women's syndrome is defined as a collection of symptoms and reactions by a woman to a pattern of continued physical and psychological abuse inflicted on her by her mate. Where does it start? Let's start up here. Unmet needs, unresolved issues, leads to anxiety and insecurity and depression. She seeks love as a solution. She finds temporary relief from this individual because she's treating him a lot nicer, pleasing and appeasing to their partner. The partner is controlling and abusive. They're angry, afraid, and withdrawn. This is the abuser. He and or she seeks reconciliation. Things get back to normal, then all of a sudden it starts again. This is battered women syndrome. Okay, so she's got a need, he's got a need, and one of them comes out on top, and that's battered women syndrome. It's usually the guy that comes out on top because she needs him so desperately. She's madly in love with him. She's seeking love, so she finds temporary relief by being really, 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 really nice to him. Then all of a sudden, of course, he becomes distant, he becomes angry and distant, and then he hits her. So it's a continuing syndrome. Remember I told you about the ladies with no teeth? Well, they're the ones that got battered over and over and over again until they lost all their teeth. I was married to a lady that, this is my first wife, that used to hit me all the time. She didn't like me especially because I wouldn't hit her back. She wanted me to hit her. I can't hit people. I don't hit people. I can't even, if you attack me, I'll probably back up and try to catch your blows, sadly enough. So I can't hit people, but she wanted me to. So after she left me, guess who she got involved with? A truck driver that just used to whale the tar out of her. She used to beat her up all the time. And she lost 2 of her front teeth. He knocked them out. Caught her with his ring on her teeth, busted them off right at the... Hates to go to the dentist too. She just hates the dentist. But busted 2 of her teeth out. Then she started dating a cowboy. This is in Lubbock, Texas. And he knocked 2 of her molars out. On one side. He was right-handed, so it was on her left side. 2 of her molars out. She was happy as a clam with that guy. Well, she wanted to be abused. She was kind of an odd person. Lenore Walker in 1984 emphasizes the following elements. As a result of chronic exposure to repeated battering, the woman develops a sense of learned helplessness. She comes to believe that there is nothing she can do to escape. And she doesn't want to escape because she's supposed to find somebody that she's in love with. She loves this guy because of who he is. My wife, my first wife, my ex-wife, really loved these guys because they were real macho. They were what she considered masculine. And masculine had, to her, was somebody that wouldn't let her get away with anything. Punch her around a little bit. And so that's what she was madly in love with. As a result of social isolation and often economic dependence on the batterer, the woman falls more and more under his domination. A lot of times women will stay with these individuals until they start abusing the children. At that stage, they sometimes will get the gumption to actually leave this individual. As she restricts her outside activities and has less contact with friends or relatives, she grows increasingly fearful of the threats and attacks. Her self-esteem is diminished. She feels guilty and ashamed about what she sees as her multiple failures and shortcomings, and she also feels increasing rage and resentment toward her partner, whose control over her seems to be growing. We're not done. The woman grows hypervigilant. She notices subtle things, reactions to the batterer that others wouldn't recognize as a signal of upcoming violence. For example, his eyes get darker. In other words, he starts squinting more. So his eyes get smaller and they look darker. Menacing, yeah, there we go. So she notices this, other people aren't going to notice it. This heightened sensitivity to danger cues often motivates the woman to kill her assailant and accounts for her belief that she is acting in self-defense. She knows exactly when he's about to attack. So eventually she gets tired of it and she strikes back, and usually the only way to strike back If she doesn't kill him, then he's going to hit her again. So she will kill him. The majority of battered women charged with murdering their abusive partners are convicted. Research with mock juries has found that participants were more inclined to accept the woman's claim of self-defense when they heard from an expert testifying for the defense. And this is according to Schuler and his colleagues in 2004. Normally her defense will be the battered women syndrome. But in order to prove the battered women syndrome, she has to have been treated for depression and anxiety at some point. There has to be proof that he has hit her in the past, that he has damaged her, so that she has to go to the emergency room. And a lot of times, of course, he's not going to let her go to the emergency room. He's not going to let her go to the emergency room unless she tells them that she tripped and fell down and hit the bedpost or something, or walked into a door. If I've heard walked into a door one time, I've heard it 1,000 times. She walked into a door. The doors in Omaha must be the most dangerous doors in the world. When I worked in the emergency room in Omaha, this was happening every night. And some nights, payday was a really bad night for doors, okay? So he gets paid, he goes out to the bar, and that night, especially if it was a full moon, oh my goodness gracious, all the doors that are jumping out and popping women in the face, it was just god-awful. It was worse than you can possibly imagine. And at that time they used to payday was always Friday, it was always a Friday, and it was either every week or it was twice a month that they were getting paid. It was always a Friday night. The most horrible time to work in the emergency room was on a Friday night and Saturday morning. Oh, it was horrible. Saturday night was just as bad on payday weeks, because those doors just came flying through the air. It was really horrible. I ran into a door. What a surprise. The door got you on both eyes. How did it do that? You must have walked in and backed up and walked in again and got it on both sides. How'd you do that? Anyway, not funny, really sad. Anyway. Okay, we're going to talk about rape. So this has to do with what just happened. It's still going on. There are still demonstrations in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of people were arrested this weekend. Susan Collins, who was the swing vote for Brett Kavanaugh, is under death threats. She has a bodyguard that is with her wherever she goes, because she voted to approve Judge Kavanaugh's nomination. So there's a lot of stereotypes about rape. The FBI found no proof that Christine Blasey Ford had been molested by Brett Kavanaugh. How common is this? We're dealing with 3 people. Two of them were males and one of them was a female. The male says that he didn't do it. The other male who was in the room also claimed that he didn't remember it. Blasey Ford was the only one that wasn't drunk. The other 2 individuals were drunk. So what they were trying to determine was, how in the world are you going to prove this? You have a woman that is making an accusation. You have 2 guys that were drunk and they say they didn't do it. So how in the world are we going to prove what happened? Is there any way to prove what happened?
Witnesses?
There's only 3 people in the room. Most rapes don't take place in a crowded elevator.
Well, people saw that they were with her, or those guys were with her, or if anybody saw that.
35 years ago. Do you remember what happened 35 years ago? Well, you're not.
Yeah.
Nobody in here is that old, except me, and I can tell you, I have to do the math just to remember what year 35 years ago was. Let me see, wait a minute. Okay, this is, at first I have to remember what year it is. It's 2018, okay. So that would be 1985, that'd be 1985. Now I have to remember where I was in 1985. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Where was I in 1985? This isn't fair. Was I in Omaha? Wait a minute. No, yeah, I was in Omaha. That's right. Okay, in 1985. I was in Omaha. I was in Germany from 79 through 82. So I was in Omaha in 1985. Yeah. Yeah, 1984. 1984, we went to California. My wife is stationed at March Air Force Base.
Your current wife or?
My current wife. I've been married to her for 40 years.
Oh.
So in 1985, I was in Omaha. I was living in Plattsmouth and I was working in Omaha. Okay. So what's the probability you're going to remember a specific party, especially if you're drinking? You know, kids do this kind of thing. And they were 17, 18 years old. So the probability of anybody remembering this situation is fairly remote. Of course, Blasey Ford's going to remember it because she was molested at the party, and that's, of course, has affected her life over the years. Is it possible that Brett Kavanaugh can't remember anything? Do you really remember everything that happened when you were drunk? Some people black out. Some people brown out. Some people use alcohol as an excuse for doing things that they wouldn't do when they were sober. So all of these things are possibilities. Victims cannot be raped against their will. This is a stereotype. This is a myth. Reports of rape are often exaggerated or even faked. And this is true. The word often is incorrect. Now we know exactly, because one of the problems we had over the last 2 or 3 weeks for Kavanaugh's nomination was that the president came out and said that he is afraid for boys because of all the false accusations of rape. Well, how many false accusations are there? Well, statistically, it's about 2% of all rape accusations are false. 2%. Somewhere between 2 and 10%. That means that 90 to 98% of all the rape accusations are true. So who should we be afraid for? The young females or young males? The ones that are being accused or the ones that are accusing? Obviously, there's a lot more females that are being raped. So we shouldn't ignore their accusations. But of course, this came out over and over and over again from the Republicans because they were trying to get Kavanaugh nominated to the Supreme Court. And they did, by 1 vote. They won by 1 vote. But this whole idea, the president said this happens all the time. The idea that accusations are being exaggerated or even faked is just incorrect. It's not totally incorrect, but it's not very common. What? Okay. Now they want me to join the cloud. They won't leave me alone. It's Apple. They just won't leave me alone. Some have an ideology that encourages the acceptance of myths about rape. Of course, this is from a study in 1980. That was almost 40 years ago. That was 38 years ago. This ideology embraces the following beliefs: sexual conservatism, adversarial sexual beliefs, acceptance of interpersonal violence, sexual stereotyping. And of course, this is a cartoon that we used to see all the time. We don't see it very much anymore, but it still does exist. That the man has to be masculine and the female has to be subordinate to the male. And he hits her over the head and drags her away to his cave, and now everybody's happy. This is an unfortunate picture. These more tolerant of rape were more likely to have traditional beliefs about gender roles, more adversarial sexual beliefs, greater needs for power and dominance, heightened expressions of aggressiveness and anger. The United States has one of the highest rates of forcible rape among the world's industrialized countries, although there has been some decrease in the last decade. It's increasing again. This is a sad, sad situation. It's increasing again. Why? We're not exactly sure. It may be the attitudes that people have. But right now, women are very upset, extremely upset. They were upset when Trump was elected president. And they are, well, including my wife, she is out there canvassing for female candidates. They were looking for more female candidates to run. And this year, in 2018, they have more female candidates running for office than in the history of the United States. My wife is trying to get people to vote. She just wants people to vote. She doesn't care who they vote for. She just wants to get people to vote. So she's out canvassing every day. I tried to call her yesterday, and she was out on her gimpy legs, making her way around Clinton, Iowa, to get people to vote. She just wanted them to vote. She doesn't care how they do it. She doesn't care who they vote for, as long as they vote. And it's women that are pushing this, and it's a good thing. We have a woman running for Congress in New Mexico. We have a woman running for governor in New Mexico, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And this is very rare. It used to be just white guys used to run for office. Now we've got women running. The lady that's running, we have a native woman that's running for Congress in New Mexico, I think. Isn't it in New Mexico? She's from one of the Pueblos? Yeah. That's not Xochitl, what's her name? Is it? I think she's Hispanic, isn't she?
No, she's Native American.
It starts with an X. It's not the lady that's running. She's native, but I think the other lady is Mexican, yeah. Which is interesting. If you ever see an X in somebody's name, you know that it's not Spanish. Spanish doesn't have any X's. It's either Basque or it's Mexican. It's native from Mexico, because Spanish doesn't have X's in it. So if you see somebody with X in their name, they're either Basque or native from Mexico. Did you figure out who she is? No. She's running for Congress. The United States has, okay, so we already talked about that. According to the National Violence Against Women Survey, this was in 2000, 17.6% of all women said that they had been victims of rape or attempted rape, and 21.6% of these women said that they were younger than 12 years old at the time of their first rape. How did Flake vote this weekend? Do we know? Sure we do. We have to know, because he voted yes. So did Susan Collins. Like I said, Susan Collins, this was the deal. They said if Susan Collins voted yes, that to nominate Kavanaugh, that they had $2 million to donate to whoever wanted to run against her in the next election. She's up for re-election in 2020, and she voted yes. So they've already got the other person already has $2,000 or $2 million in their treasury to defeat Susan Collins. Oh God, what's happening now? 21.6% of these women said that they were younger than 12 years old at the time of the first rape. Now, why in the world would somebody rape somebody that was that young? What's going on? Why would you rape somebody that's younger than 12?
Having more power.
Power. Has to do with power.
Schultz, Torres, Small, and Democrat for District 2.
Xochitl.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right, it's not your fault. Oh, God, make it as big as possible. So that's not the native lady, I think that's the lady from,
Torres, Small.
that's the, yeah, there's Xochitl's small.
I don't see her name in
I
there.
don't see it either.
I haven't been seeing any of her. Is it Deborah?
Yeah,
Deborah Holland.
Deborah Holland.
Here.
Holland. It looks like it's.
Holland.
Yeah, Holland. It's Haaland.
Yeah, I actually saw Steve Price, Michelle Lujan Grisham, and Michelle Garcia Holmes at the parade.
Oh, you saw him?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And eager to grab the microphone.
Among rape victims, 31.5% before being physically injured, report being physically injured during their most recent rape. So about a third of the women that are raped are actually injured during the rape. Almost 18 million women and almost 3 million men in the United States have been raped. 1 out of every 6 women in the United States will be raped sometime in their lifetime. Women who reported being raped as minors were twice as likely to report being raped as adults. Really? I know. This is
Do you think the statistics is higher? Do you think it's higher though, other than 1 in 6?
Oh yeah, I think it's definitely higher than
Yeah.
1 in
Because
6.
some women do not.
They
say
don't
anything.
admit it.
Yeah.
They do not admit it. Well, just like Christine Blasey Ford. 35 years, it was 28 years later that she finally admitted that she had been raped.
I mean, is this in urban countries or also rural areas?
This is here.
I know, but is it like in areas where there's, like in the city or? Like
Is it more
places
common
like
in
here?
the city or is it more common in rural areas? It's more common in the city, in urban areas. There's more anonymity in urban areas. Usually in rural areas, it's not a stranger. It's usually somebody you know. Actually, there's not that many people you don't know. But in urban areas, of course, it's more common for a stranger to perform the rape, perpetrate the rape. Women of all ages, social classes, and ethnic groups are vulnerable to rape. The high-risk age groups are children and adolescents for most offenses, sexual as well as non-sexual, as well as women ages 18 to 24. So the most common incidences of rape are women who are in the reproductive age range. As odd as that sounds, or not odd, I guess there's a logic to it. Sad as all that is, but even a baby, I told you about the 18-month-old that was videotaped and raped, sexually molested. Geriatric rape is not that uncommon. I was living in Plattsmouth, Nebraska. They had the what was it? It was the Lions Club geriatric hospital was there, and one of the women, she was like 87 years old and in a wheelchair. She was raped by one of the guys that worked there. 87 years old. Then he took off and he tried to run across country, and they finally caught him in Upper New York State. I know, this is in Nebraska. What an idiot. According to the National Violence Against Women study, only 19% of women and 13% of men who were raped after age 18 said their rape was reported to the police. 19% of women and 13% of men. Yeah, so there's a lot more that we don't know about. We have no clue. All we can do is assume that they're out there. And we find out later in life that these individuals have been sexually assaulted. Men, of course, don't admit it. They don't want to admit it because it makes them look weak. So men are less likely to admit that they were assaulted. Why are rapes reported, why are they so low? Victims may think that reporting won't help, and in this case, we just had an individual that admitted it in front of the entire country. Women were marching in the streets, and did it make a difference as far as the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh was concerned? No, he still won by 1 vote. Why would they would suffer further embarrassment as a result of the reporting? Of course, Christine Blasey Ford, of course, has become the poster child for these problems. She doesn't want to be the poster child. This is not something you want to be known for. Law enforcement officers would not believe them, and of course, the President of the United States said it's a very common thing for females to fake a rape just to attack a young man. The President said that, so guess what the law enforcement officers are going to be thinking now and in the future. That was now. We're more progressive now than we've ever been before. So you can imagine what was going on 10, 15 years ago. What's the probability that this person's going to believe you? In order to get a conviction, you have to prove that there was a rape. Well, usually a rape occurs between two people. So we've got a situation where a woman is accusing a man, and if she decides that she wants to accuse this guy early enough, then she can go to the hospital and have a rape kit done. But even if she goes to the police right away and goes and has a rape kit done, there are some states that rape kits they haven't processed them in 5 years. The southern states. This is a really serious problem. And rape kits are not easy to process. I used to do it when I was in the lab. In the old days, we couldn't do DNA studies. So we had to use, wait a minute, acid phosphatase test. Semen is very acidic, and we could tell if it was semen by doing an acid phosphatase test, which is not an easy test to do. But we had to confiscate everything. We had to confiscate the underwear, we had to take samples. It was a very, very difficult process. And then we had to process the rape kit. In the military, we always did it right away. That was always our number 1 priority, was getting the rape kit taken care of, despite the fact it took all day to do it. But we would do, because that was in the military. However, other jurisdictions, if it's somebody's cousin, you're going to lose the rape kit, or you're going to do it incorrectly, or you're just going to put it over in the corner and never get it done. But this is a really serious problem. And that is if she comes in right away. If she doesn't come in right away, then the first thing she's going to do is try to cleanse herself. And now all the evidence is gone, all the DNA evidence. This is a really sad situation. And for that reason, what proof does she have that this has ever taken place? If he has damaged her, if he has injured her, remember, in 31% of the cases, the woman has been injured, so she has proof to some extent. They can still do a gynecological evaluation of her vaginal area. They can determine if there was any damage done to that area. But that's if she doesn't come in right away. If she does come in right away, we've got DNA evidence. And now, of course, we can prove whether there was intercourse. However, what is he going to say? Ronaldo was just accused of rape. Ronaldo is probably the world's famous, most popular. He's a very attractive man. He's a really good soccer player. One of the best soccer players in the world. Probably the best known soccer player in the world. He was just accused of rape. Even if there is evidence that there was intercourse, what's the proof that it was non-consensual? This is a really serious problem. And for this reason, women don't want to come forward. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them at all. I've been working with this for 50 years, and I can understand how they feel. Counsel women, rape counseling, when I was the only one around, usually it's another female that does the rape counseling. But if I was the only one around, I was the one doing the rape counseling. Not an easy task. It's not easy. So I don't blame Blasey Ford for not coming forward. You're 15 years old. Do you want all of your friends at school to know that potentially you were almost molested by two of the biggest jackasses in the school? No, probably not. I don't blame them. Many victims are afraid that the attacker will retaliate if charges are made, and these expectations are sometimes fulfilled. It could have been that she's 15 years old, both of the males were 17. It's possible that they would have started rumors about her, how she pulled them into the room. And of course, as a 15-year-old, you certainly don't want that kind of a rumor to happen. Experts have developed typologies of rapists. Most typologies have emphasized 4 factors that distinguish different types of rapists. The type of aggression that the rapist used, this is very important. How much aggression was there during the rape process? We need to determine how angry this guy is and why he is assaulting women. So what's a reason that an angry rapist might perpetrate a rape? What does the anger have to do? What could potentially have happened to him in his past that he's that angry with women? Knock, 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 knock.
He might have been sexually molested when he was younger also.
If he was sexually molested, I think we're going to find that down here somewhere. Not yet. If he is sexually molested, the question is who sexually molested him? If it was another guy, then we're not dealing with the same situation. But what if he was dominated by his mother? And his mother wasn't very affectionate, but he was dominated by his mother. So he's really angry at his mother. So he tries to show his domination. He tries to pay back his mother by dominating other women. And this is about the worst way he can do that. So this guy was potentially maltreated by his mother and probably wasn't shown very much affection. When the level of aggression was high, whether it was heightened sexual arousal in a sadistic manner, was he trying to damage the individual? Was he trying to punish her for something? If he was very sadistic, of course, it may be that he's trying to pay somebody back, even though this person doesn't have anything to do with that person. Ted Bundy raped and murdered women. We don't know how many, but they all looked alike. That's weird. Why in the world is he murdering these women? Why is he raping them to begin with, and why is he murdering them afterwards? And then they all looked alike. What was that all about? Well, as it turned out, he had a girlfriend. She rejected him. He was a very handsome man. Well, it gets worse than that. He was Ted Bundy's mother turned out to be his grandmother. And his sister turned out to be his mother. So, and he tried to sexually molest his sister, who he thought it was his sister, turned out to be his mother. Wow. Just how. And then he had a girlfriend that rejected him. The person that he was madly in love with, she rejected him. Then all of a sudden, he kept finding these women that looked like her, and it would piss him off, and he would capture them. And he was a very attractive man, and he was a very affable fellow, so he was able to get women to follow him because he was such a cutie. Yeah, I know. I've never had that problem. Whether the offender showed evidence of psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder, of course, these people are just mean. So of course that's one of the things that you're looking for. Whether the offender relied on deviant sexual fantasies to produce sexual arousal, and of course we see this as well. You can imagine with all that fighting taking place that this individual is having a little bit of trouble getting aroused. Potentially these individuals will use different fantasies. They will dress the victim in a certain way, or they will tear certain articles of clothing off, and they will try to perform all of these odd sexual fantasies. Whew. This is usually how they catch it. If none of this takes place, then how in the world are we ever going to figure out who this person was? The Green River rapist raped and murdered any number of prostitutes up in the Washington Valley. Some of these murders, rapes and murders, potentially took place or were perpetrated by Ted Bundy. But there was Ted was gone, and the rapes were still taking place. And they never could figure out who the guy was. Another individual, what was it, 35 years ago, he started raping and murdering women, and he would beg the police to come and catch him. They never did catch him. And then he turned himself in last year or the year before last. And they never, this is in Wichita, Kansas. Anyway, this is the only way we can catch these guys, is by profiling them and trying to figure out what they look like. Now the reality is that we don't, even if they have these deviant sexual fantasies, how in the world are we ever going to discover who has these strange sexual fantasies? But we can use it as proof. We can try to track them down. Hopefully they'll leave some DNA someplace and we can catch them. Doesn't always happen. Ellis in 1989 identified 3 theories of rape. The feminist theory, emphasizing rape as a pseudo-sexual act of male domination and exploitation of women. This is a very common one. The social learning approach, suggesting that sexual aggression is learned through observation and imitation. The evolutionary theory, holding that natural selection favors men who use forced sexual behavior. These are all the theories of rape. Problem is, of course, we've got lots of rapes and we have lots of men that are performing these rapes. And which one of these theories fits? Well, unfortunately, it fits different individuals, yeah. Not all males are trying to dominate and exploit women. And the reality is, if you watch television, if you watch old movies, if you watch, the older movies, you don't see any of this at all. But starting in the 70s and 80s, we started seeing this type of behavior portrayed in movies. Of course, if you look at pornography, this type of sexual exploitation is taking place all the time in those types of, that type of video. And of course, the whole Playboy, the idea behind the Playboy magazine has to do with domination. Yeah, has to do with domination, male domination, and that's being machismo. And actually, if you, the more you interact with individuals, the more you realize there are a lot of individuals that this is true for them. This is really true for them. None. Usually it's an attractive male. The women pursue them as much as they pursue the women. And a lot of these individuals can do just about anything they want, and nobody will complain. I had a friend when I was in Omaha who, for some reason, the women just found him attractive. I never could see it, but this guy could seduce anybody. It was the oddest thing in the world. This guy was... And of course, I used to draw blood with him, so we worked together, so he would tell me his exploits. Now the funny thing was, he was in an automobile accident, and he lost a piece of about 10% of his brain. And after he came back, he was different. He looked the same, he acted the same, he didn't talk quite the same, but women started rejecting him, and it was the oddest thing that you've ever seen. Before he could do anything, and say anything, And women just, they would breathe funny around him. But after his accident, I didn't see any difference. I could not see the difference, but women didn't like him anymore. It was the oddest thing in the world.
10% counts. It's the little things.
It was, yeah, it must have been something that I was blind to. At that point, I was, instead of working with him, he worked for me. And I had to fire him because he came to work in bicycling pants. And the women didn't like the idea that he was...
Showing so much.
Yeah, but before, my goodness gracious, he could...
They didn't mind.
They didn't mind at all, but afterwards, even though nothing had changed that I could see. Anyway, funny situation. These different approaches illustrate that rape cannot be easily explained by any one theory. Of course, they all fit and they all don't fit. Each of these classification systems fails to capture all the behaviors and motivations that typify rapists. For every rapist there is out there, there is a different reason for his behavior. So we have to look at each one individually. Some are limited by the fact that they are based on studies of convicted rapists who have been sentenced to prison. Fewer than 10% of rapes result in convictions or prison sentences. So what we're doing is we're relying on the information we have from 10% of the rape cases. And these are the guys that were caught. So these are the guys that didn't do it very well. So we're basing all of our theories on these individuals that were not very good at it. The people that are good at it never get convicted. They always claim it was consensual, which is exactly what Ronaldo said. That's exactly what Mike Tyson said. He was accused of rape. Turns out that the lady was not quite 18 yet. And so it was statutory rape. This was in Indianapolis. He was convicted, and he claimed it was consensual. He claimed that because he invited himself to her room, and because she said, "Yeah, you can come to my room," he considered that her saying, "I want to have sex with you." I know. He was a world champ,
He's got
boxing
bumped into
champ.
that so many times.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he went to prison for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. What we're doing is we're looking at the people that were actually caught. We need to look at all of them. Only 14.6% of rapes were committed by a stranger to the victim. 16.4% were committed by a non-relative acquaintance. 6.4% by a relative, and 64% by an intimate partner. So most rapes are committed by an individual that you know is your partner. This is somebody that is dating you, or you're dating them. As of 2008, the estimate for sexual assault committed by a known individual is about 70%, and that's according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics in 2011. So the most dangerous person to you is the people that you know, not the people you don't know. The stranger rape is not that common. The closer the relationship between the female victim and the offender, in general, the greater the likelihood that the police would not be told about the assault. So if it's your boyfriend, if it's a guy that you're dating, probably you won't say anything about it. When the offender was a current or former husband or boyfriend, about 3/4 of all victimizations were not reported to the police. Usually we only find out about former husbands if they murdered the lady. As sad as all that information is. You don't want to do damage to this individual. Maybe you have children with this individual, so you don't want to say anything because you don't want them to go to prison, and then they stop paying child support or whatever. Makes sense. Date rapes tend to occur on weekends between 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the morning. They usually take place at the assailant's home. It's easy to find a place to be private. Date rapes tend to involve situations in which both the attacker and the victim have been using alcohol or drugs, but they are less likely to involve the use of weapons. Instead, the date rapist employs verbal threats and physical prowess to overpower his victim. And of course, this is something that you need to be aware of. Can you trust that guy if you go to his apartment? Can you trust that guy if you let him come to your apartment? Well, maybe, but don't get drunk, and certainly don't take drugs with this guy, because you may wake up and realize that you've been raped. Rape victims suffer physical injuries, emotional pain and humiliation, and sometimes severe and psychological after effects. As we saw with Dr. Blasey Ford, who will not have a room in her house where she doesn't have at least an avenue of escape. All of her rooms have 2 doors, one leading, and both of them, of course, leading out. And when she built her own house, that's what she had. There had to be 2 doors, which makes it a little interesting when you're making a bathroom, because there's 2 doors, so you have to lock both doors when you go in. Burgess and Holmstrom in 1974-79 described a rape trauma syndrome experienced by many rape victims with 3 kinds of reactions: emotional responses, disturbances in functioning, and changes in lifestyle. And we saw all of this with Dr. Blasey Ford. When did we quit? 50. 11:50, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, and we saw all of this with Dr. Blasey Ford. What has happened to her since she was molested at that party? She had emotional responses, of course, obviously. She stopped, she didn't want to fly. She didn't want to fly in an airplane because she was afraid of closed spaces, of being in closed spaces with males. And of course, it changed her lifestyle. She is a psychologist today. Now remember, I told you, people become psychologists because they're trying to figure something out. It's obvious what Dr. Blasey Ford was trying to figure out. And it's interesting the type of psychologist that she is. She's a statistician, and she does research. She does research. How much emotion is involved in any of that stuff? None. Yeah.
Unless you're passionate about numbers.
Well, I doubt if she's passionate. Is anybody passionate about numbers except myself?
Mr. Wayne.
Really kind of interesting, but she did become a psychologist. Potentially one of the reasons is trying to figure out what happened to her. What happened to her? Why did she change? Could she ever recover from this? She's been self-medicating. She's been trying to cure herself ever since she was 15 years old, potentially.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
No, well, the human brain wants to be fixed. So we have to do it. We'll do it anyway, and we'll become obsessive about it. If something negative happened to us that we need to figure out. If we're schizophrenic, for example, we don't want to be that way. We don't want these odd thoughts in our minds. If we're depressed, we don't want to be depressed. It hurts too much. So we try to do something that will make us feel better. So you're feeling depressed, what do? Well, if you're a female, you can eat. And if you eat fatty foods, it will increase the amount of serotonin in your brain. If you're a male, you can increase your testosterone level and by exercising. So here we are, we're trying to combat all of these negative things that are happening to us. This is one of the reasons why nobody stays the same. We're continually changing. We're trying to improve our moods. So the same thing would happen in this case. Yeah, she's trying to do something. She's trying to figure it out. I was left by my first wife. Why in the world would she abandon her children? That doesn't make any sense. Women don't abandon children. Women, they have all that oxytocin in their brain. Now I know they have oxytocin in them. But I was trying to figure out why in the world she left me. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. So that's one of the reasons I became a psychologist, to figure all these things out. It's a good thing I didn't become a counseling psychologist. I would have been shaking my finger at every woman coming in the door. But I figured it out with this. Sometimes it's the guy's fault, and sometimes it's the woman's fault, and sometimes they're just incompatible.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't fit. People don't fit together. The only reason they got together is because somebody's girlfriend said, or her girlfriend said, "Oh, isn't he cute?" That's a good reason to get married. He's cute. And who said it?
What are
anyway?
we, third grade?
Exactly. Well, we are third grade. The typical rape victim's response unfolds in a series of discrete phases. The acute phase begins with the attack and lasts a few hours or a day. The needs of the victim are to understand what is happening, regain control over her life, predict what will happen next, and air her feelings to someone. Usually she tells somebody, but maybe not. It all depends on how close she is to people as to whether she tells them. But one of the things that's happening is she's trying to figure out what happened. One of the things that she would like to happen is not to think about this. She wants it not to have happened. And that's what happened with Blasey Ford. She tried to convince herself it didn't happen. She didn't tell anybody for 28 years. This is very common. You're trying to make it go away. The best way to make it go away is if it never happened. So you try to forget it. And this is one of the reasons why women, when they are sexually molested, they don't run to the hospital and get a rape kit done. They're in denial. They're trying to pretend that it didn't happen. They're trying to convince themselves that maybe it was consensual. Maybe it was my fault. They're actually blaming, if they blame themselves, then it will go away. Potentially. Sure. Well, it could happen that way. I'm not going to, I can't stick my finger in there and correct everything that's taking place. It just is not going to work in their brains. Within a few hours or days of the attack, many victims slip into a period of false recovery. Denial occurs. I'm okay, everything is the same as before. Everything's going to be the same. I won't have to worry about this. It's just one of those things that, just like eating lunch 5 days ago, I don't remember what I had. Maybe I can just forget it. I'm okay. It's going to go away. Then a secondary crisis occurs in which some of the symptoms of the acute crisis phase, particularly phobias and disturbances in eating and sleeping, return. Now she can't sleep. She has insomnia. She either is eating a lot. Remember that serotonin I was talking about? So she starts eating fatty foods, increasing the tryptophan level. Tryptophan, of course, is a precursor for serotonin. So her eating all of a sudden is disrupted. Either that or she's not eating at all. Now, why would this be? Why has she changed her eating habits? Let's assume that the whole tryptophan thing is not what she's after. She stops eating, or she starts eating a lot. It's very common for this individual to change completely after one of these sexual assaults.
It's about a sense of control.
I'm sorry?
It's about a sense of control.
Suddenly she has a control over things. She doesn't want to be who she was before because that person was raped. So if she stops eating and becomes anorexic, she's not going to look the way she did before. She's going to change her persona. Or she gains a lot of weight. Now she's not attractive like she was before. She may stop, her hygiene may change to the extent that she stops bathing. She starts doing things like cutting. Makes herself as unattractive as she possibly can. She may get all kinds of interesting tattoos and all kinds of interesting piercings to make herself look different. Very common. Okay. Really all depends. Okay, so all of this stuff may change. This phase may last for hours or days before another quiet period emerges in which the victim feels a range of negative emotions, such as loneliness, anger, and guilt, of course. Why in the world would she feel guilty? Remember, she's trying to convince herself that it didn't happen. So she's feeling guilty because potentially she seduced what is going through her mind may be that I seduced him. It was my fault. All of these things that defense attorneys will use when they're trying to defend their client, their rapist client, they will say, well, she was dressing provocatively. So these kinds of things will go through the individual's mind. Long-term counseling for rape victims is difficult to provide because of the lack of staff at some rape crisis centers, and in some cases because of a feeling that counseling is no longer needed. And that's the biggest problem. Remember, she's going through these ups and downs of emotional response to what's going on. Sometimes she feels like she's okay. Sometimes she feels vulnerable. If she feels vulnerable, then she may go see a counselor. But remember, the brain doesn't want to hurt. The brain wants to be cured. It wants to feel good. So it's going to be in denial. And denial, of course, feels better because it doesn't hurt. So while she's in denial, she's not going to go to counseling. And she's going to think she's okay, but then she'll go through a crisis phase again. And this has been happening to Christine Blasey Ford for 35 years. How many people think that Brett Kavanaugh molested her? Does anybody think that he did? I got a yes. I got 2 yeses, 3 yeses, 4, 5. Oh, she doesn't count. What do you think? Do you think he did? Is it important? He's the Supreme Court Justice. He gets to decide court cases. Do you think he did? Do you think he did? Do you think he did? Sharon, what do you think?
Probably. She said it's a secret.
Do you think he did?
I don't know too much about it, but guessing by the way you describe how she does her housework, I think so.
Oh, her reaction. You think she okay. What do you think, Tyrone? Wow. What happened to the senators? I mean, here's a classroom full of people, and maybe it's my influence that I convinced you all that it's really happened. She thinks it did. One of the senators asked her if it was Brett Kavanaugh that did it, and she said, I'm 100% certain that it was Brett Kavanaugh, not somebody else. But when Susan Collins voted to confirm him, she said, I don't think that Brett Kavanaugh raped Blasey Ford. That's what he said. That's what she said. He said she said. Now we're playing politics with rape. How much fun is that? We always play politics in Washington, D.C. We don't have a choice. Okay, so remember, she's going to be going up and down and up and down and up and down, trying to figure this whole thing out. She's a psychologist, and she still hasn't figured it out. I'm a psychologist, and I still haven't figured out why my wife left me. How many years ago was it? 45 years ago. Oh my God, what's wrong with me? Even after 1 year, many victims continue to suffer emotionally. Among the major problems were fear and anxiety, and of course, we know that Blasey Ford has the 2 rooms. She has 2 doors in any room that she has in her house. She will not go into, she has a hard time going to the restroom, because restrooms only have 1 door. So she has a hard time going to public restrooms. I know. Findings also indicated that rape victims were significantly more depressed than those who had not been raped, and that fear, anxiety, and depression were highest in women who had been raped more than once. And I guess that's logical. Why in the world would that happen? If somebody was molested as a child, why are they more likely to be raped as an adult? This is a tough question. There are no easy answers to this question. Can you think of any reason why this individual would become victimized more than once?
Kind of the learned helplessness and a deworth, like their worth, their self-worth, and their confidence in themselves
Has been Okay, that's logical.
Plummeted.
That makes sense. Any other explanations? This is a tough one.
Maybe they live with that person, so it's hard to escape. And they can't get
It
away.
was, especially if it was a family.
Family member.
Remember, 64% are intimate partners. These are individuals that your boyfriend, your ex-husband, your husband. So you can't get away from them, can you? And of course, if this is the mechanism of sexual excitation for either one, well, for him, obviously, it's potentially going to happen again. Well, what if somebody was raped as a child? I mean, that is the question. The other question is, we marry our parents. Don't we marry our parents? Okay.
In essence, yeah.
So if you're a female and your father was an alcoholic, you're more likely to marry an alcoholic because that looks attractive to you. My ex-wife, I told you, my ex-wife wanted me to abuse her. She thought that was sexy. She married 2 guys after me that broke her. One of them broke her nose and one of them knocked her teeth out. Or they actually both knocked her teeth out. She thought that was sexy. Now, why in the world would she think that's sexy? Her father was abusive, exactly. And he'd say things like, I only do this because I love you. And, evidently I didn't love her, I didn't beat her, hardly. I never beat her at all. We won't go into that. When she stabbed me. I got a little physical, but that's...
I would have too.
Well, yeah, she standing there with a knife in my chest.
Tell my son to defend himself.
Okay, yeah, this is really kind of fascinating, isn't it? This individual has been raped once in their life as a child, and here they put themselves in another situation. And that may have something to do with it as well. Okay, so when are you the most likely to be sexually molested? After drinking.
When you're probably the only female there, you think the others too.
Well, that's a possibility, but
Powerless.
yeah. So it's when you're drinking. So potentially this individual, in order to forget, trying to forget her past, she self-medicates. And her self-medication is alcohol. And so she goes to bars to drink. And then afterwards, she's more likely to be raped. I had I worked with a nurse when I was in Texas, and she was molested as a child, and she was a big time heavy drinker. The first night she was on base. First night she was at reservist base. She went to the officers club and got snotty. She found herself in the back seat of her car with the assistant base commander on top of her. She'd been molested as a child, and she used alcohol as a way to cope. And so here she was. Same thing happened to her the second time. But she continued to drink, and she continued to put herself in that negative situation, despite the fact that she had been raped. But she's self-medicating.
No, not that part, but, females, you're always told, you're the one that went into that situation. You should have known better. But, with the way we are going now forward and fighting for equality amongst men, that's something that wouldn't make sense to someone. A man wouldn't get told that.
No. Well, if he has done this multiple times and gotten in trouble, then yeah, he probably get told stay away from
Stay away
alcohol,
from
you
there.
idiot. Every time you do, you get sexually aggressive. Wait a minute, that's what they said about Brett Kavanaugh. He was a mean drunk.
Yeah.
gets drunk.
Yeah, he gets sexually aggressive.
And then
Okay.
aggression has that tie-in with the testosterone levels in him as well. You know, the paper that you had your class read before this, sexual aggression and sexual arousal,
Right.
the connection between that.
Right. Good point, excellent point. I need to turn this off. Actually,